For our next topic, we will review last week's FRQ. Now, before we get started, just a quick reminder that in the description box, you can find a link that brings you to the scoring guidelines for this FRQ. As always, if you haven't completed the FRQ yet, you should probably go ahead and do that before continuing. So with that out of the way, how about we take a look at our FRQ. Mr. Stedman and Stark traveled to Stanford in 1971 in order to observe Philip Zimbardo conduct his Stanford prison experiment. Zimbardo recruited several college students, randomly assigned a role of guard or prisoner, and gave them free reign over a mock prison created in the basement of the psychology building. The prisoners were placed in prison outfits, while the guards had matching khaki uniforms with reflective sunglasses designed to shield their identity. While the experiment was slated to last 2 weeks, it was discontinued after 6 days because of how poorly the guards ended up treating the prisoners. At points, the prisoners were convinced they were unable to leave the experiment. So this particular FRQ has 3 parts to it: A, B, and C, worth a total of 7 points. Keeping with traditional SOTA's guidelines, we will start with Part A. Part A asks us how a list of psych terms help explain the behavior of the guards during the Stanford prison experiment. The first term we are presented with is de-individuation, so we will start with that. De-individuation is a social psych principle that explains the loss of self-awareness and restraint in situations that foster arousal and anonymity. Now that we have the definition, on to the application. To score a point here, you could say that the guards had reflective sunglasses, partially blocking their identities, making them feel less guilty about the harsh treatment of the prisoners. And it is as simple as that. You showed proper understanding of the term through the definition and by applying it to the prompt. You get the point. So let's skip a line and move on to our next term, which is going to be the amygdala. The amygdala is a limbic structure involved in decision-making and emotional responses, specifically those related to fear and aggression. To score your point, you could say something along the lines of, the guard's overactive amygdala may lead to poor emotional-based decision-making, leading to the mistreatment of the prisoners. So that does it for Part A. Now time to move on to our next section of Part B, which is fairly similar to Part A, but this time it is asking for us to identify how various psych terms may explain the passive behavior of the prisoners. Starting with punishment. Punishment is the removal of a reinforcing stimuli or the addition of an aversive stimuli in order to stop a behavior from repeating. To earn your point here, you could say that due to the repeated punishment of the prisoners, they have decided to exhibit passive behavior to avoid being punished in the future. And next for Part B, we have learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is the hopelessness and passive resignation someone learns when they are unable to avoid repeated aversive events. To apply this term to the prompt, you could mention how the prisoners felt as if there was nothing they could do to escape the prison experiment, so they just gave up trying. Alright, so that does it for Part B. Now on to our final section, Part C. Part C asks that we use various psych terms to explain the different issues with Zimbardo's experimental design. Our first term is going to be the APA ethical guidelines. The APA ethical guidelines were set in place in order to ensure the well-being of participants in psychological research. There are a few APA guidelines you could choose from in order to score this point, but I would go with the most obvious one to do no harm. You could mention that during Zimbardo's experiment, the prisoners were put through several tasks that could be damaging to their psychological health, breaking the APA guidelines. Point 6 is the Hawthorne Effect. The Hawthorne Effect states that participants in experiments may act differently if they know they are being observed. To score your point here, you could mention how Zimbardo was constantly observing the guards and they were aware of it. It is possible that the guards acted as they thought real prison guards would act in order to please Zimbardo. This would be considered a confounding variable in the experiment since it's not a true reflection of the guard's behavior. And our final point, point 7, is going to ask us how the observer expectancy effect might impact the results of the experiment. And just an FYI, the observer expectancy effect also goes by another name, experimenter bias. Like a lot of AP Psych terms, they have multiple names. I recommend trying to remember both. Annoying, yes, but it's the safe play. Anyways, the observer expectancy effect is any form of cognitive bias that causes a researcher to subconsciously influence the participants of an experiment. To earn your point here, you could mention how Zimbardo acted as both the lead experimenter and the prison warden. Because of this, he could have unintentionally influenced the behavior of his participants, leading to bias in the results. Things like the observer expectancy effect are reasons why researchers often utilize methods such as a double-blind study to ensure validity in their experiment. Alright, so there you have it. Our Let's Get Ethical FRQ. If you do have any questions about the FRQ, drop a comment in the comment section and I'll do my best to get back to you. And it looks like that's the class. I will see you guys next time. Peace.